Good afternoon. This is Charlotte Pierce. I'm the president of the Independent Publishers of New England, co-president actually, and thank God. But I'm the producer of Indie Office Hours, which you are now watching on by the miracle of Google Hangouts on air and YouTube. Welcome, and we are all about the publishing process here and what makes it work, getting you familiar with the nuts and bolts of it so that you can be a successful self-publisher or independent publisher if you're publishing other people's books. So we're about ready to get started, and we have two incredibly knowledgeable guests. This is going to be a really valuable session, I believe, and we're going to go for about half an hour. David Amerland is with us from Greece, and hey, David. And Angela Bohl, who's the executive director of the Independent Book Publishers Association, which is the national group that IPNI is affiliated with. Laura Williams is the director of Good Inklings, a great content creation and marketing in Florida. So we're kind of like all over the globe. I like this. And I'm here in Texas. I'm usually in Massachusetts, but I'm here in Texas at a Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to this week, and we'll kind of settle in here.
Yeah, sure, real quick. My name's Laura Williams. I'm a content writer, marketer, social media strategist, and I also run a hangout on Wednesdays at 7:30 called The Writing Biz, which is about the business of writing. And that's been going very, very well with Charlotte's help, I must say. And that's really about all I have to say. I don't want to spend any more time on it. We have so much to go over. So.
Yeah, we are joined by David Amerland. I never know where he is at any given point in time, but I think he's.
Makes two of us.
Yeah, right. In your mind, where are you in your mind? He's perhaps in the Mediterranean now, and he's the author of Google Semantic Search, which I thought was really relevant to our topic today, which is metadata and getting your books discovered in the search world of today. So I think he's going to have a lot of great stuff to say. David, what's your nugget for the week here?
Well, at the moment I'm on vacation, so I'm not doing a lot of work.
We pulled you out.
Yeah,
are you working on a new book?
I am, but I can't talk about that, so I can't tell you anything about it at the moment. But I am. Usually, I travel the globe. I talk to executives, I consult with some companies, I do strategy sessions with C-suite executives, and in between I talk at conventions. I was in SMX London, SMX East before that, and just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Poland on a Semantic Search conference. So
cool.
That's what I do.
Yeah, we'll have to get your tips for getting over jet lag next session. Yeah. I can't believe it. I suffer so much from that, but I can't believe that you travel so much.
Oh, but, you get used to it. It's a question, and it takes a lot of coffee, like a lot of coffee. But it works.
Hence your obsession with coffee.
Yes.
and sugar. In the form of donuts.
Sugar only on the weekends. So.
Yeah, I should mention that David has an incredible, philosophical, thoughtful piece that he publishes every Sunday morning. So if you get up like 5 o'clock, maybe East Coast time, U.S., you'll be able to read the Sunday Read by David Amerland. It's always just. It's better than the New York Times. It's absolutely
wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome. So Angela, we're getting to you, and we're going to have you launch the discussion of metadata and BISAC data. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your current activities and then kind of get into the definition of those two terms.
Sure. I just wrote down the Sunday read. That's my next activity. I'm going to sign up for that. I'm executive director for Independent Book Publishers Association. It's the largest publishing association in the U.S., about 3,000 members. This week we're taking our member titles to ALA in Vegas, so that's what we're all working on, is getting ready for our convention this week. Should be good. Did you want me to just start to describe some metadata?
Yeah. What kind of sparked this? I'm sorry, I got my phone off, or my video off. What kind of sparked this was me realizing that we had miscategorized one of our books, and that prevented it from being adopted by, I believe it was Barnes & Noble, where my author went in and asked them if they could list it. They said, no, it's categorized as a textbook, and we can't order it on that basis. So that kind of made me think of the talk you gave at the Independent Publishers of New England conference about, I think it was BISAC data and, you know, getting your ducks in a row on that. So I need to go back and fix. I think we did fix the categorization, but have to follow up with the bookstore, you know, status. So you want to kind of give us a little intro to that?
Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time, so I wouldn't worry so much about that. I think figuring out how to categorize your books and the whole system of metadata for the book industry isn't always the easiest thing, so it absolutely does happen. Briefly, at the 101 level, metadata is just information about information, and in the book world, you could say anything you want about your book. You could tell somebody it's a, quote, great read. You could, which would be, by the way, a review in the metadata world. You can tell people anything about a book, but our industry thinks that you should tell people between 30 and 40 very specific things about your book. Some of them you would know, like title and author, author bio, and some of them are a little bit out of what you would think, like what is the exact size of the book and how much does the book exactly weigh. And that's just to help with supply chain purposes. So there's this whole range of different elements, as we call them. Elements being like title is one element, author bio is another element. A whole bunch of different things you could say, and we in the book industry have defined some that you should say, and BISAC codes, which is apparently where you got in a little hot water, is one of those things. So defining the subject category of the book using a standard syntax called BISAC subject headings is one thing that our industry says you should do. And again, BISAC codes, it's just everything you can do when you're working with an industry as large as the publishing industry, is large nationally and internationally, to say the same thing to each other so we can understand what you're saying is good news. So BISAC subject headings is just a way to say this is a fiction book, this is a historical romance book, this is a textbook, using the same language between training partners.
So when we have the book in question was a early reader series for 2nd to 4th grade called The Doggy Investigation Gang. So it's about these dogs that are personified and go and solve mysteries. And it's a really cute book. It was it's first in the series. She plans, you know, a never-ending series, I suppose, and hopefully. But really well written, cute, nice, you know. And the first book benefits a charity called Paws New England for dog rescue. So she's donating all of her proceeds to that cause. So what, you know, we thought that categorizing it as education would help schools pick it up. But is that not the case, or?
Well, there's a whole webinar we can get into on BISAC codes and how to assign them. And what's interesting is Barnes & Noble will be very specific because they're different buyers, and if they don't buy for one market, they're really not allowed to pull in a book which is categorized for that other market. So they can kind of differentiate themselves in that way. But there are different
university. Sorry.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They have a university division, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's probably what this buyer was saying, is we don't buy in that educational field. There's a there are different codes for professionals versus lay people across a number of different categories. Science is one. If you have for a professional scientist, there's one kind of category. For a layperson that's just interested in science, like the world is flat, for example, might be one of those books, then it's a different kind of code. And that's just to help, again, differentiate the audience as much as we can, too. So, yeah, they were looking at that. A lot of independent publishers do fall into that trap a little bit. So
it's best to pull back from a too specific category?
But you should get as specific as you can, but understand the different, which categories are meant for a professional audience and which categories are meant for a layperson audience. And then within those categories.
And where do you find that information?
It's probably going to be defined on the website. The Book Industry Study Group produces the BISAC subject codes, so there are user guides associated with it, and a number. We even have a webcast on IBPA's Open Learning site that describes all of that and talks about which codes are used for professional books and which are used for.
I'm putting the link up for that now.
Thank you. I was going to ask you if you could do that, and I was wondering if David had any observations on. Have you delved into categories?
The moment I get outside the very specific tech industry, what I usually find is that every industry more or less has had its own metadata, which it has had for some time, and it's largely siloed. And you have metadata for each publication, for instance, and you try to make it as specific as possible, and that's communicated from a publisher to perhaps a bookshop or those who are doing bulk ordering, but it doesn't actually get very much further out. So if you have a website, for instance, that the metadata isn't there in a way that's actually helping the book get categorized. And there are two ways of doing this at the moment. One is by using hard coding. You need to go into schema.org, which is a W3C consortium approved organization, and actually get the metadata hard coded on the site if you are a little bit handy with code, that is. And it is a little bit difficult. The other thing,
hard coded on, you mean? I'm sorry, on your website?
Yes,
on your website.
Yeah. You basically what you're doing is you will be telling a search engine, because it's invisible, right? I mean, people don't see this, but a search engine would. They would see, for instance, that this is an illustration. Illustration belongs to a book. This is a book title. It's attached to this particular illustration. This is the book cover. And this is the ISBN. This is the price, and this is where you can buy it from. Now, if you don't know how to code this, and there's a specific way of doing it, in Webmaster Tools, there is something called the data highlighter, which Google makes available. And what that does is it allows you to specify the web page you're pointing it to, and pick the elements from that page and actually explain what they are. You can say you're doing the same thing, but you're using plain English now. So you're saying this is the book cover, this is the title, this is the ISBN, this is the price, this is where you can buy it. And all this is linked in Google's index. So next time the Google bot goes to your site, essentially it takes this structured data, which is the metadata on that particular page, and it takes it into its index. And what you will find is that it will help with the indexing, it will help clarify what that particular page is about, it will make it more available to specific queries, because now it's a lot more flexible in terms of adapting it. A very specific query, whereas before it's sort of a little bit more constrained by content. And what usually happens with books is, because the description is not very wordy, because you get a blurb pretty much when you have a book, then it becomes very difficult for Google to basically show that particular book in relation to a search query, unless the book is very well known or the query is relatively specific. Which means that perhaps a lot of queries which are not very specific, which could have perhaps benefited from having that book surfacing in the content, will simply not see it. But by having structured data in this way, then you make sure that this can actually happen where it is suitable to happen. And this is something which is worth bearing in mind, whether you're a publisher or even if you're an author and you have your own website promoting your book, particularly in the indie industry, where the authors do a lot of the heavy lifting. Then having that particular approach can help a lot.
Yeah,
so this way. Go ahead, Angela.
No, I think that's a really important point because I run into that a lot now with publishers too. This the idea there's this internal structured metadata that we have to know about and trade between our trading partners and our industry, and then there's this other thing that happens on the outside too. This other kind of metadata you have to embed in your websites and understand about content as it flows over the web, and they are separate things. I just wanted to say I think that's really important to point out.
Yeah,
Well, they could
exactly.
certainly work in tandem to probably really boost your sales and your visibility.
Absolutely. I think you have to do both and understand both, because you can see how the internal metadata for the publishing industry was developed prior to the web and all of that, and it's embedded in the culture of our industry and how we operate. So that's important. We have to know that to get your book seen in industry, but you have to know the other thing that David so rightly talks about too.
Yeah, exactly. And it's particularly, I mean, we talk about semantics or semantic search creating a more transparent world, and it's exactly how it happens. You get this trends, data being a lot more portable, and the portability of data helps sort of break down a lot of the silos which have existed because of industry segregation. And there hasn't been anything sinister in this. It's just that when you do something which is very specialized and very specific, it is very difficult then to explain it to the outside world, particularly if there's no real need for it. And in the beginning, until now, there hasn't been. But with semantic search, we actually get the value of metadata having a direct impact on a book's visibility, and this is something which should definitely be looked at.
I have a question.
Laura, I was going to ask you if you have.
This kind of part of it's like assumptions on my part is when you're doing the metadata. I mean, how important is the title of the book? I think it would be more difficult on a novel type book to make the searchability of the title real powerful, because it may be a romantic story that's not on a particular subject in the title. What I mean is, like, if it's a nonfiction book, like your book, David, it says Semantic Search. So if you put in Semantic Search, your book's probably going to be the first thing that comes up.
It is, right? It does, but I mean, yes.
Yeah,
but, I mean,
which was smart.
It is,
but it's really Google Semantic Search, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But let's take, I mean, you brought up an important point. Let's take the title of a non-fiction book, and let's say it's a romance book. And, the moment you highlight it, you've got to understand that essentially what you're doing is you're allowing Google to understand the title not just words, but also as a very specific theme. So somebody perhaps doing a search on a book, let's say they go on the web and they do a search on romance books, based in Italy, let's say. Depending on the title and Google's understanding of it, if your book has actually got a theme in mind, it will actually come up. And this is the kind of power that we get now with semantics. Essentially, we understand the real value of data instead of just blindly matching words, which means that it is important to mark up the title, but it is not as crucially important to have every possible keyword in a title in order for it to come up. And that helps you find an audience better. So it's more contextual, really. It's yes, okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, the reason we're talking about this is that if I'm going to be looking for a book about home inspection, I'm not going to go scroll around my local bookstore. I'm going to Google it, and then I might go to my bookstore. But I'm going to find. It probably won't look past the first page of citations if I find something that looks reasonable. So.
Well, we know from Google that at the moment 8 out of 10 purchasing decisions start with search, and that includes books. So people go on the web, and because they don't know what they are looking for, they may do very generic sort of searches like, adventure books, 10 best romance novels, things like that. And having visibility, having the right kind of metadata, which helps categories, as Angela said, it helps a lot in basically joining the dots, which helps create the kind of picture which will help your book find an audience. And at the end of the day, all the activity which goes on around a book is about that. It's about helping it find the right audience. So the more you do, the better it actually is.
And
yeah,
that
there's
all
something
ties
that
into your...
about titles too. Kind of talking a little bit very specific on publishing, because what you had described did two things about metadata as I think about it is it has to be very applicable. It has to be absolutely about your book and spot on exactly what it is, and it has to be very specific. So I deal with a lot of indie publishers, for example, who don't understand that title is a separate element completely from subtitle, separate element completely from volume number,
Yes.
separate element completely from other things. Even you can even break metadata, not to get too specific, down into, if it's the tree grows in Brooklyn, the is a separate metadata element. And all of that specificity across the web is really important. And the reason I go so deep into that is because I did hear someone say something interesting to me about doing titles online for search, not as deep as semantic search, as David is the expert in, but saying something about a romance book, like it's called Hot Times, that's the title, but the subtitle is, an Italian Renaissance adventure, so the subtitle had this specificity of what it was, and that kind of pulled up through search as well. But again, these things have to be completely differentiated. I've seen so many indie author books in Bowker's database, for example, with this confluted, like, crazy title, which is all things in one, and that's not helpful in search either. So
Exactly.
title is such a great example to talk about metadata with. Title, it's a really good one.
It is, and I think it's just part of developing digital competencies or literacies, because it's a relatively recent thing. We've only been talking about metadata in a real way for the last 2 years, and there's still a lot of confusion about it. So I think it's encouraging that we're talking about it, and we'll see a lot more clarity coming in as time goes on, and these discussions really help.
So if I'm an indie publisher and I'm just like, I'm listening to this and I don't know where to start, I kind of believe you guys. Where do I start? I know you mentioned your open access university at IBPA, Angela.
I mean, this is a great place to start. So I think if you're listening to this, as David said, you've started. So good. That's awesome. I think we do a lot of education, and there's some things in open learning. We have a session on metadata that's taught by the editor folks. Editor develops ONIX standard for the book industry. We have stuff specifically on BISAC coding. But I would say talk to people who know. I mean, publishing, particularly for independents, is such a social and community-focused event partnership. So start reaching out on LinkedIn, start talking to your colleagues at conferences, start just educating and seeing what you can find.
Yeah, we have Independent Publishers of New England. It has a Metro Boston branch that meets every month. Every other month we have a speaker, but this month it's just a coffee hour. So, places like that can be good. I don't know if all of your affiliates have regional branches, but our region is so big that we just thought it would be useful.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a city. But and then David, you mentioned.
If you go into Webmaster Tools, they have on structured data on the left-hand side there's a menu, and you have something called Data Highlighter. The moment you click on it, this is what you do. It gives you a little field where you put in the URL of the page you actually want to highlight, and it acts as an overlay. The moment you do that, then basically you can pick, let's say, an illustration, and you get a drop-down menu, and you say, what is this? And you can say it's a book cover or it's a book image. Then you pick up a title, and you say, you specify it as title. You pick up a subtitle, specify it as subtitle. Pick up where it's available to buy. Pick up the price. And basically that becomes a very detailed, granular overlay that Google then will be able, it keeps it in its memory, and next time it indexes your website, it will be able to take that data, and when it gets to its index, it goes from being unstructured, which is, everything sort of jumbled together, and Google has to make sense of it, to being structured. It actually has a very strong metadata layer that identifies all the different elements.
So Webmaster Tools are available to anyone, or do you have to sign up?
Yeah. As long as you have a website, you can just go to webmastertools.com, I think, and basically you need to verify that site that it's yours by uploading a small piece of code, and then basically you can control it. But the beauty of this data highlighter tool is that every page you mark up, and you can mark up a lot of pages, remains in memory and can be modified. So if later on you add a different element to that page, or you add a review, or you add anything else, you can just go back and simply modify it. So next time Googlebot gets to your website, it will index it and update the information in its index.
So if you get a review, say on Amazon, you could add that to your site and then link to it in the Webmaster Tools.
Yes, you could. Yes.
I have another question. I try, like, in the meta description of a website or a book, the language is used in the actual description part. I try to keep true to that kind of language in everything that I do that deals with that. Does that help increase his searchability? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I mean, there's two ways of using language. One is perhaps style specific, and let's say if you've written a book which is, let's call it a textbook, you're not going to go and write a very fluffy description about it. It's going to be a fairly formalized way of expressing the content. The other way which you can approach that is that essentially you're using words which are very specific in terms of the content and very descriptive, and they're part of the, I mean, if we call them keywords essentially, they help highlight the specific nature of the content. And really, you should be using both. You should be using a style which is true to the book, because the language difficulty is actually indexed and becomes part of the overall character of the book. Right. And the second thing is you should be using synonyms or keywords which are related to the subject, but they should be used naturally. You can't sort of try and force it too much. So, if you've written a romance novel and it's in Italy, you can't say this is the best romance novel written in Italy on a romantic sort of holiday because you can sort of keep it. So, it has to be basically be as natural as possible. And Google is very good at this now. The more natural the language pattern, the more authentic it deems to be the content, and the more desirable it becomes. And eventually become a lot easier to extract the kind of data that it needs from there.
Okay. That was helpful.
Yeah. We have a couple more minutes left, and I think we just scratched the surface of this. But David, you had mentioned a software program. I can't remember what you called it. Another, like, external program. Started with an S.
The W3C?
Oh, W3C, sorry, yes. Yeah. W3C is the web consortium that basically tries to set web standards which are applicable everywhere. They're behind what's called the schema.org markup, which is Semantic Markup. Now, this is an organization which is backed by Google and Bing and Yahoo, and Bing, of course, is Microsoft. So the three companies have got together, and they have agreed on the general guidelines of the semantic markup that can be applied to a website. One small note of caution here, or rather two small notes of caution. First of all, semantic markup applied manually requires some kind of knowledge of coding. So if you haven't messed with the code of a website before, maybe this is not the time to learn.
Don't.
Yeah. Can't help.
Yes. Even though there is a Google-approved and widely acceptable way of marking up semantic content on a website, the chances are, because things are still evolving, the chances are if you're marking up a lot of books, you're going to come into categories which either you'll be uncertain about, or they may not exist yet, or Google perhaps hasn't yet put into its catalog base. And this causes always a little bit of confusion. So this is the second thing to keep in mind. If you're doing things in bulk, and I saw very recent examples of this with the automotive industry, where they're trying to categorize a multitude of products associated with the automobile, and they're coming up against categories which are not yet approved by schema.org. And they may be in the future, or they may not. We're not sure yet. So, they're taking a gamble. But this only happens, if you're a publisher who has a lot of books on a wide variety of subjects, and you're actually doing hard bit by going through schema.org. You have programmers who do it for you. well, then you may come up against this. And this is something worth bearing in mind, because you need to document what you're doing, because if you need to change in the future, you need to know where it is. So you need to understand this.
There's like another layer beyond kind of the
There are many layers. There are many layers. I think there are lots of layers. And the first time I heard semantic as a word, I still sometimes try and figure out what exactly and what are the layers in that. My recommendation to publishers coming in and starting is start with the first layer first. It's like an onion. You're going to peel away these layers as you go through, and try to be as unintimidated as you possibly can feel as you work through it. David's right. It's a learning a new literacy issue, and it's a whole new vocabulary that comes along with metadata. But essentially, you're talking about information about your book. You're talking about different things you can say to people about your book, and you're trying to be as specific and applicable with this information as you can be. If you kind of go through with that in mind, what have I said about my book? Have I been as specific as I can? Okay, great. Is it completely applicable? Good. Does it sound like a human said it? Awesome. Then you're starting to kind of get through there, and then you branch into the whole web sphere, and in a way that has built it from the ground, and that will make it even easier for you as you start to get online. So
yeah, that makes
it's fun. It's good, and don't try not to be as intimidated by it, because it is a really fun language to learn.
You can't break it, right?
That's you can very rarely break things. People think they can break the internet, but you cannot break the internet. So you'll be fine.
Yeah, you are not that powerful.
You're not that powerful.
The metadata helps you when you get in an elevator with big wigs and stuff.
Oh yeah, it's great. It's great conversation.
Give your elevator speech.
You wanted to be the most popular person in the room.
Yeah. So, well, thank you all. I think this is just, like I said, scratching the surface. So maybe we'll come back and do like a case study. We'll take a little screen share and do a book and kind of talk about the various steps. Or we could do that in our Metro Boston branch, perhaps. I really appreciate all of you. Laura, did you have any parting shots?
No, I thought this was absolutely wonderful information, and I think it's going to be helpful to what I'm doing too, because a lot of writers, they're not business people, so any step up that they can get, this is great information for them to have in an easily understandable way. So thank you very much for it.
Good. Well, we will come back to this topic, and we'll pull David out of vacation if we need to. Which we will need to. Or we'll just show up in Greece. All right.
We'll put the address in the comment feed.
We'll have to bring donuts, though, right?
And suntan lotion.
Yeah, suntan lotion. We'll bring baklava.
I think there's plenty of them here.
Too much. All right, thank you, and we'll tune in next week to 12 p.m. Eastern U.S. time for indie office hours, and we'll talk about, what are we talking about next week, Laura?
I'm not sure.
Internships?
I think so, yeah. I think that's what it is, yeah.
We could do internships next week, because I have a wonderful intern from Champlain College Champlain College Publishing Initiative, and I'd love to have her on, too. Okay, we'll see you then. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, guys.
Hopefully I will be able to stop the broadcast.